Are you surviving instead of thriving? Jesus promises abundant life, not just existence. Join us for Pray Without Ceasing 2026 on August 15th in Buena Park, California, for a day of restoration, renewal, and reconnection with God. Stop running on empty. Experience the fullness Christ died to give you. Pray Without Ceasing 2026 because you weren't meant to just survive. Register now at praywithoutceasingministries.com. I am so excited to have my guest and my sister, Opal Allen. Opal, say hello.
No, 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 sister. It's Opal Wade Allen.
You know what? I don't know who you are, okay? It's too much. I don't know you. Okay,
I'm
let's start
sorry.
over.
Opal Wade Allen. You got
Hey, friends. Welcome to Leading from Wholeness. I'm Audrey Shelby, a wife, mother, leader, and child of God. I'm here to let you know that your call to leadership was not a mistake. Fear and anxiety don't have to run your life. You have been called by God to lead right where you are. We'll talk about leading with authenticity and power, overcoming barriers that keep us stuck and get in the way of us being effective leaders, and truly rising to the call that God has for us. With tactical strategies such as prayer and reading God's Word, we're going to go deep and grow closer to God. You can lead from a place of freedom and purpose. So grab your journal and your hot chocolate and let's go. Welcome back to the Leading from Wholeness podcast. I'm Audrey Shelby, your host. I'm so excited to have my guest today. I will let her introduce herself and share more. This is my sister, Opal Wade Allen. Opal, say hello.
Hey, girl. I'm so excited.
Oh, you are so funny. Okay, so today we are talking about the neurodivergent leader. Okay, and if you don't know what neurodivergent is or what neurodiversity is, it simply is a term that refers to the different ways that people's brains process information. That is the simplest way to describe it. It is an umbrella term that encompasses different types of neurodiversity, including things like autism or autism spectrum conditions, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, as well as developmental coordination disorder. And there's some other ones that fall under that umbrella, but that's essentially what it's about. And so today we're going to talk about what does this look like in the workplace? How are we navigating this? What are some possible strategies that may work? And some ways to look at how do we think about neurodiversity in conjunction with our faith and what that looks like. So understanding that this is not, I'm not a doctor, I'm a social worker. My sister is, she'll share with you more about who she is, but she is a fabulous event coordinator, event designer, and planner. But we're really kind of just sharing our experiences today and encourage you, if you need to seek out actual medical advice to do that, that this is not medical advice, but this is us having a candid conversation today. Okay, so Opal, share about yourself. Give us your background. What's your origin story? What do you do? Who are you?
I am Opal Wade Allen. I am the middle sister, and probably the most, I would say, probably the most rambunctious because we have extensions of our siblingshood, but I'm probably the most rambunctious one. I am probably the one that probably keeps the most energy. I would probably say I think that Audrey, you're typically the more level-headed one. So I would, give you that being that you're the little sister, so that's really cool. And then, we have our older sister who is sometimes she is just silly. But she's also a wonderful, great aunt to both of our babies. And she does that very well. But as far as me is concerned, just like you said, I am in the event convention trade show space. I do own my own event design company where I am the event planner, I am the balloon artist, and I'm also the event designer. So yes, I wear a million hats all at once. And in my professional career, I work for a company, and they are a general service contractor in the trade show and convention space. My background does stem from catering and conference management. So I do have lots of time in that. And now I've transitioned into trade shows, which I will tell you is a different beast. I think that for someone as myself, like she said, we are, or I am neurodivergent. I think that this is a really cool space to be in, being that it is ever changing. There is never a dull moment. There is never a time where you can be really just sitting on your laurels because things are constantly moving. And it really requires a lot of adaptivity. It requires quick and fast thinking, and really multitasking, which sometimes is not a skill set that we being neurodivergent people lend to all the time. And so sometimes it's a struggle there, but I think that because it is so exciting, it really is very captivating to our brains. It gives us that sense of dopamine that we lack. And I think that for that reason, it's a good space to be in.
Thank you so much. So tell more about like your experiences and how this then shows up for you in a workspace. Like what is it that you typically have to do as an event coordinator, manager, planner, and then what are some of the things that you have to navigate in your own uniqueness?
I have no problem telling you what my diagnosis because I think it is definitely something that you shouldn't be ashamed of. It is a personal story, obviously, but in learning more about myself, I also have to learn that it is okay to talk about it. I would probably say in 2022, I was finally diagnosed or found a doctor, a psychiatrist that could diagnose me with it was mild to severe adult ADHD combination type, which when you have combination, it is a combined inattentiveness and hyperactivity that I typically struggle with. They often say that women and young girls are often misdiagnosed. And so it is probably something that I've had for a very long time. So typically when you have talk about hyperactivity, especially in women and girls, it shows up as not a physical hyperactivity, it is more of a mental. And so I do notice that I struggle with the mental hyperactivity, meaning like it's very difficult to turn my brain off. So with all of that said, I had entered into my career after I graduated, I entered into my career in catering, and I found that I was having a really, really hard time focusing. Obviously, somebody was giving me multiple tasks, trying to, again, talking about multitasking and just really like getting my work completed or remembering, I don't know, five or six things that somebody is telling me to do. And I found that I was struggling. And actually, I don't know if you remember, but years ago, you had told me that you thought that maybe I should reach out to somebody and see that if I could get some type of accommodation or work on getting, a diagnosis so that I can protect myself in the event that this caused issues with my job, which it was causing issues at my job. So we ended up going obviously into the pandemic and then nothing happened. And then it was much more of a more intense workload. And there were more technical aspects that I found that I struggled, with. And there was a lot going on. And I really felt like I was having like a mental like meltdown. I just didn't really understand what was happening. And so finally I went and got help. And then that's when I found out about the diagnosis. From that point, I had to come to a realization where I was like, okay, if this is what it is. The funny thing about getting that diagnosis is because you start to look back at all of the things that you've done. The psychiatrist reached out to my husband and he wanted to get my husband's feedback on the things that I may do. And when I tell you that I was textbook, I was like, wow, this is kind of crazy. So it at the same time, it gave me such a great perspective. Like it almost felt like somebody was lifting the wool off of my eyes, like I could finally see what was wrong all this time that maybe I struggled with. But then at the same time, it brought me great frustration because then it's like once I knew what was going on, how do I stop it? In that moment, how do I control it? And I think that since then, you start to get on these medications, and that is the stimulant medicines. And I've been through several of them try to figure out which one works for me and which one doesn't. And that has been a struggle. I'm not going to lie there because there were There's just been a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of side effects.
I love what you just said. You said, kind of once you got the diagnosis, it was kind of like a relief. And then you're like, okay, how do we fix it? How do I stop it? Tell me more about that. Like once you,
Hmm.
because you've shared, like you've been going however many years, right? Trying to figure out what's happening with your processing and why you're having a hard time kind of, focusing, and be able to complete tasks. But once you got a diagnosis, you're wanting to fix it. Did you want to fix it before? Like, what made the diagnosis so heavy, if you will?
I think that because I didn't know what it was, I think as the years have gone on, you just kind of deal with it. And there was nothing that called out what I was doing or how I felt that made me feel like, something's actually like wrong. You know, I think that
Mhm.
it wasn't until I got into an atmosphere where it required certain things of me that I severely struggled with. And it started to attack my confidence, especially in the professional like space, you know. So I think that there was things that were already there, but maybe I just brushed it off to just okay, this is just how I am. It was kind of like a joke. "Oh, this is just how Opal is. He. You know what I mean? But then when it comes to a professional, like I said, a professional atmosphere, and it's taking me longer to do my work. Or I'm noticing that when people are giving me task after task, I I might forget one or two. You know what I mean? And I was thinking, I said, I don't understand why I'm struggling so bad. When you had gave me that recommendation to go, maybe go get it checked out, and then a couple of years went by because of, COVID and everything like that. It really wasn't at that point where I had thought that there was any like help. And then there was the part where insurance didn't cover it, and a lot of it was cash, and I couldn't afford it. So it really has been in the last, I would say, maybe 5 or 6 years that it's becoming much more widespread and acceptable, and that now insurance companies are starting to recognize it as, and I like that you called it an intellectual disability. That's what you called it, and I really liked that because it isn't something like, where someone could say, oh, it's this or it's that. Really it is a processing, thing. And my brain is different than a neurotypical person. And it's very complex. If I must admit, it's very complex.
I don't want us to miss this because you said something specific about you got to a point where at work it now was impacting your performance, right? Well, this is prior to the diagnosis, not
Yes.
really knowing what's happening, but you know that something's not working and you're struggling. How do you navigate a situation where something is now impacting your work performance and you may not want to tell your supervisor, but there now is like a need to? How do you even start to approach that kind of conversation in a workplace where oftentimes there can be shame or people just want to keep it private if they have an intellectual disability? How do you approach that?
I think it's really hard. Going back to the example where I said that when I first got into that job, and I know you were encouraging me to, go get help. And one of the things you said to me was, what you're feeling is not normal. I was blaming myself for my shortcomings with my performance, but realistically, you were telling me it's the environment that I was in. We were understaffed. I had a ridiculous workload that was unmanageable. So I think that there were not only the issues that I was experiencing myself, but there were also issues within my organization that were exasperating what I was already going through, right? And then when you talk about shame, I had coworkers who were making me feel even more worse about myself because they were commenting on, like how I would do my work, or how if I would make a mistake, they would criticize me. One girl actually had said to me, she said, are you stupid? Like you must be an idiot. You know what I mean? Because of the mistakes that I was making. But there were things that were happening that I wasn't being trained properly, or there were
Wow.
just, like I said, it was an unnatural work environment. So it really created environment for me that I didn't feel safe. also I hid it from everyone because I was afraid that if anyone knew what was going on, that I would get fired. By the time I got to the second job, I very much so tried to mask it, and I really tried to make it not be an issue. But the work was so heavy, and it just requires so much more of me that I actually felt to myself that maybe this isn't a space that I need to be in. Like I really started to doubt myself. And in fact, fast forward to it, I had a moment last week where I felt like maybe this job isn't for me. Thankfully, I have a really good director where now I have been able to speak up
Mhm.
for myself. And so, just to go back to answering your question, our job in particular, we have things called business resource groups, and for short, BRG. And one of the groups is a BRG on disability. And there has been a couple of panels and or discussions where they've had guest speakers who speak on neurodivergence. And it was at that point where I finally felt the freedom, right? Or I didn't feel like I had to like hide or had to be ashamed because this was something that they were actually highlighting, right? On a national platform, you know what I mean? And I felt like, okay, maybe this is okay for me to say out loud. The first manager that I had, I probably don't feel like she was okay with it. I felt like she looked over my shoulder a lot. I felt like she was very micromanaging, and things like that. And so I didn't feel safe with talking to her about it. It wasn't until I got to the second leader that I have now, who is much more mindful in like her communication. She's empathetic, and I really feel like it's easier to talk to her about it. But from a personal standpoint, I think that we have to be comfortable, we have to speak up for ourselves, because there are certain accommodations and there are also certain things that are going on in the workplace that absolutely impacts how we work. And I struggle with those things. And so
Mhm.
it is helpful for me to say that to someone, you know what I
Yes.
mean, so that they understand what it is that I'm going through and what I'm struggling with. But then also with that comes that not everybody is going to understand. That's also something you have to deal
Right.
with.
And when you think about neurodiversity, it really comes under that umbrella of inclusion, right? And so many people, I think, are still not
Yes.
quite as understanding, or sometimes they don't care to be understanding, let's be very honest, or what some of even the terms that are used, right? And so I think it takes a lot of courage for you to even share with your leadership that, hey, this is something that I experience, and these are the supports that I need in place.
Most people don't even know what it is. I have to say that
Hmm.
even trying to explain to a neurotypical person what neurodivergent is, they don't get it. And oftentimes the things that I get, which they say could be one of the worst things to say to a neurodivergent person is, oh, I think everyone has a little bit of ADHD. That drives me bananas.
I
And I
don't
really
know
hate
why
that.
people do that. And no, I don't like it. People say it all the time, and it's like, that's not true.
All
And
the
you're
time.
downplaying somebody else's lived experience or dismissing it even.
It really is awful. I have to tell you that. It really is, because it is something that people really struggle with, and it's all different, right? But I think as an adult, right, because you can be a child, and hopefully as a child, if you find out, the good thing about being a child, you're catching it early. But as a kid, you also have to be an adult, be a parent that recognizes it and advocates for you and understands it, you know what I mean, and gets
Absolutely.
the child the help, which that's obviously helpful. And then I feel like they have a better, and I don't want to say, because I didn't find out as a child, right? But I would assume that with that, you have an opportunity to kind of like hone in on what it is or what type that you have and where your struggles are, you know what I mean? And really try to find things that work for you. I think as an adult, the bigger things that bothers me, is the stigma behind being an adult with it, right? It absolutely
Mhm,
makes me
mhm.
feel inadequate. It absolutely makes me feel like I cannot function as a, 44-year-old woman. And that is so frustrating. And sometimes it can be very hard pill to swallow some days. You know what I mean? It's hard.
How have you thought about your neurodivergent diagnosis with your faith? Is it something that you have to reconcile? Is it something that you maybe never have even thought of? And so the scripture I want to read is this is Psalms 139, and this is verses 13 to 18, and it says, You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me. So, would love to hear your thoughts on have you had to reconcile this with your faith? Is it even something you've thought about?
I think that scripture that you shared was really good. I don't think I've ever had heard that before, so I'm gonna have to make sure I save it. In regards to your question, that really threw me for a second. Exactly sure if the two crossed. So if, as far as reconciling it with my faith, I would probably say it would start with giving myself grace, which is, if I'm being honest, it's very hard for me. I often beat myself up over feeling like I am a failure or believing the trope of not being good enough and having that shame, as we talked about earlier, and dealing with the daily thoughts of, what is wrong with me. So it really does take a lot of prayer and positive self talk to resolve the internal conflict that I often experience for me to reach a state of peace. I also find that sometimes the feedback that I may get from some faith-based people is more of a spiritual dismissal of my symptoms and diagnosis, and it often comes out like there's nothing wrong with you or you don't need to go to therapy. Because in the faith-based community, there's always been that stigma about people in mental health needing to go to therapy. Oh, well, you just got to pray about it. You know what I mean? And so I have found that it's not always welcomed. Maybe I shouldn't say welcome. Welcome might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's dismissed. Like I think we talked about that.
There's definitely, I think, different thoughts on it, right? Like you have people who are very much like proponents of Jesus and therapy, I mean, because I
Hmm.
believe, God's given us therapists. I'm a social worker myself, so I understand completely, the helping
Yes.
profession and the need for the resources. And there are still, like you said, there's still a stigma around mental health in certain communities, and particularly not just in faith communities, but also in communities of color, and so there can
Yes.
be this stigma added when you have, like you said, people who are really hurting and really impacted, and then not having outlets to say, no, something isn't quite right. And I do need additional support, and it's okay to say that. So I just want to validate you in that. Like, I know you were saying, like, thinking, like,
Yes.
what's wrong with me? And there's nothing wrong with you. You know what I mean? Not in that
Yes.
context, not in a negative or a shaming or a deficit type focus, but it's just this is my experience. And, what tools, what resources, what can I tap into to help me to manage it, right? Because, like you said, you're praying
Right.
through it and prayerfully it gets better. You also have the medication, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on the medication, but it also is okay to say, this is my experience and not and trying not to allow others to take that away from you. So
Yes.
I didn't want to cut you off, but I want you to finish. But as you
That's
were
okay.
talking, it made me think about like, yeah, no, there's still a stigma. But what have you tried that has been helpful for you?
Okay. Yes and no. So like you said, some things have been helpful. I definitely think that medication is helpful. I think that once you find the medication that works for you, I think that it is a game changer. I really do feel that way. But again, it's a journey in finding what works for you. The CBT training, I can't say that I have gone through that more consistently because the therapist that I was working with had took a little bit of a hiatus. And so it is something that I am looking to get back into because it wasn't
Okay.
anything that I got an opportunity to really dive deep into to
Okay.
try it. But I have heard good things about it. So that is still out for debate. In regards to, there are certain things like I've read a lot of books on it to help me understand my symptoms a little bit better. I have implemented a couple of processes, like in regards to the Pomodoro technique. It's one of the techniques that is said to help a neurodivergent brain get through grueling tasks, and even not even just grueling tasks, get through tasks, period. Basically, it's helping to eliminate time blindness, because one of the things that a neurodivergent person may struggle with is time management. It's definitely something I struggle with. And so it's utilizing a timer or doing things in chunking methods, where it's like, for 25 minutes, I will work on something, whether I'm cleaning or I'm doing something, some type of task or something like that. And then you get up, you take a break, you walk around, and allows you to not overload your brain, or where it gets to the point where it's too much time, and so then you're no longer literally not focusing on it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Trying to create a routine, that is something I think that's very crucial for someone with neurodivergent brains, and it's very hard for me, because when there's no routine that is established, it's kind of like I mean, I just feel like I'm all over the place and nowhere at the same time. And so that was one of the things that I was working on with my therapist. And I like to joke with myself and say that, sometimes my brain is like, being me is like having like 50 first dates, like the movie.
I
Um,
love that movie.
because me too. It is so funny, but that's how I feel like my brain is, because I'll get up one day and I have the best intentions and I want to, do this and I want to do that, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna start this, yeah, and then I don't, and then it's like, well, there's always tomorrow, so then we start over tomorrow. So that's just some of the things that I try to do. I try to write things down and take a list, make a list, so that I can learn to prioritize, because oftentimes we struggle with that. So I can be really good at making a list. Now, whether or not I execute the list, that's a little elusive sometimes, and it doesn't always happen. But I really have to. That's where that grace comes in, where I have to give myself grace, and I have to give myself positivity, like positive feedback, when I can at least accomplish, three out of the five things that I wrote down. You know what I mean? And then not be so hard on myself when I accomplish zero
Can I tell
out
you
of the five
something?
things.
So one thing, and
Sure.
I don't know where I got this from. I don't know if I got it from Stephen Covey, but they say to be successful at like your to-do list, don't put more than three things, because you're not going to get done with more than three things. So if you have 10 things on the list in the morning, just know you're not going to get done with all 10. And so if you make the to-do list shorter, then you feel like you've accomplished something. So I would just encourage you to do three things on your
Oh.
list and not five. Yes, it's not you. Do three things on your list and see how you do. And then the next day you can put whatever else you may have put on there. But if you have six and seven things on your to-do list, the likelihood of you completing all is unlikely.
Oh, tell that to my workload. Sometimes I have 12 things that I've written down, and I feel like not even half of them get done.
What was the
It's crazy.
chunking thing? What was the chunking? Is that the one with the timer?
So it's yes, 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 it is. It is. It's so the Pomodoro is basically, like I told you, it is to help with time blindness. And so with that, you just basically you chunk tasks into 25-minute increments, which is supposed to be the amount of time that your brain can focus on something without losing interest. You know what I mean? And then there's a Pomodoro timer. So I have a timer here at home. Depending on how much time I need to give myself to something, I can turn the timer around to a said number. So if I want to give myself 10 minutes to do something, or 30 minutes, 45, 90, or whatever, then I use a timer. And so that is supposed to help when I have two. I have one here at home, and then I have one at work, and I usually try to do that, like, when I am working on my emails, to give myself 30 minutes to get through my emails. It works for me when I remember to use it. But it is a good technique.
I do time, I guess chunking is what I use a timer for myself, but think particularly almost like I'll do something every hour, right? So I will kind of make out my to-do list for the day, which will be more than three things. But then I will map it out by hour, right? So 1 hour I'm doing something and I'll set that timer for an hour. Now, here's the thing. The task may not take an hour. It may only be 30 minutes, but I allow myself that time to get things done. And then I start the timer over. For me, I find it highly effective because it reduces my distraction time because I know like, okay, I only have an hour to do this. And so it helps me to kind of zone in. My husband says I will get tunnel vision on some things which is good
Mm,
for execution, but not when you have multiple things to do. So I could stay on one project
right.
half of a day. I don't have time to stay on something for half a day. So the timer really helps. If you're listening to us, if you've never tried timing yourself, time yourself. I think that's great. And I hadn't heard about the 25 minutes helping you really kind of to focus past the 25 minutes. So I love that. So what would you say? And thank you so much. You've shared so much richness about your own experience. What would you say to someone who's struggling with the impact of how their brain processes information? Maybe they have a diagnosis, maybe they don't, but they're really struggling with this. What would you say to them? How would you encourage them?
So as I say this, I would be saying this to myself. Again, giving yourself grace, that has to be really the first one because we're so hard on ourselves, right? So that would be number one. Seeking help of a psychiatrist because the psychiatrist actually has to diagnose you if you believe that this is something that you are struggling with. And then once you get that diagnosis, then try not to take yourself too seriously. And I say that very like lightheartedly, right? Because some days I have bad days. I when I made the reference of 51st dates, it really is my way of making light of the situation so that it doesn't get me down too much. But just knowing that, hey, this is new, understanding that, I'm not going to be perfect every single day. And then, just really realizing that it's not a make or break thing. You know what I mean? You really can start over, you know what I mean? And you can try again. Um, I would say the next thing is, obviously giving yourself patience, praying for patience, praying for help with being consistent because obviously one of the things that we struggle with is procrastination, so really praying for asking God to help you be more consistent, even if you do one thing consistently every day, it's progress as long as you're making some type of progress. And then the last thing would just be asking God to really see yourself the way he sees you, and then
I
just
love that.
continuing to not give up. Yeah, asking God to help you see yourself the way he sees you.
I love that. I love that. I love that. When you were when you were saying like, kind of making giving yourself grace and making light of yourself, it made me think of count it all joy when you run into challenges, right? Because it's not a trouble. Like the scripture says, count it all joy when you encounter any trouble. But it's like, how can we count it all joy in the challenges, right? And try to still enjoy our lives despite
Yeah.
something that can be difficult. Because you are a leader, right? You are a leader at your company. You're a leader as an employee. You're also a mom. You're a leader at home and a wife. What does this look like as you lead? And speak specifically for Opal, not a general term, just for you. How does this look like for you leading, navigating ADHD?
That's a really good question. I would have to say that most times it is scary. I think in a previous episode you spoke about imposter syndrome. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
is a constant battle for me. It gives masking sometimes, because I fear that someone may call me out for a mistake, especially at work, or, maybe something that I've done, or if I miss something. I also, it could, to me, it means that I could be feeling overwhelmed faster or more often than any neurotypical, leader could. It also means that I struggle with achieving more of like a structured communication style. Sometimes I am on meetings and I'm in teams where I see certain leaders do certain things, and I often think, "Oh, I wish I can do that." And then when it gets to me, sometimes I look at it where, okay, that's not something that works for me, so I can't do that. But then I have to think, do people expect me to do, that? I may not be able to do that. I may not be able to uphold what other people, do. But ultimately, after all of that, I have to really try and focus on my superpowers instead. I think that being a neurodivergent leader means that I have a special ability, to be innovative. I think that my
Absolutely.
thinking is nonlinear. I can hyper focus when I really can do it. I can hyper focus on things when I really need to understand, complex concepts. And I have a high emotional intelligence, and I also show extreme empathy towards others that I work with. And I think that I thrive in chaotic situations. I'm not saying that I like it. I'm just saying that that when I'm at work and I'm on show site and I have a lot that's being asked of me,
It works
and I
for
have
you.
people that are coming up to me, I have a lot going on, it works for me. And I thrive in those situations.
That's a strength because
When you're
everybody
managing a
does not
household,
thrive that way.
my kids are obviously older, you
Hmm.
know and I think that now that my kids are older, when I look back at it and think about the things that you do as a mother, and like how difficult sometimes it was at navigating your children's schedules, and the household and extracurricular activities, and then work, and then I was in school, and then now I have my mom because I caregive for her. You know what I mean? So I'm constantly on 1,000. And I think that that's when it is very difficult sometimes for me to rest and to come down. When I talked about the hyperactivity earlier in women, it's often more of a mental load. And so I think that there is reason to celebrate a neurodivergent leader because we have such a different point of view and a way of
Hmm.
thinking,
Hmm.
and looking at things. And I think there's an energy that we bring that maybe a neurotypical leader might not have.
What would you say to someone who is a supervisor, who's supervising someone who has who identifies with the neurodivergent community? How would you encourage them to be supportive of their direct report?
So I just think that you have to foster an environment where your employees feel safe. I mean, ultimately, that is what it comes down to. And I think that even though they may not know or understand or experience what having ADHD, I can't speak about, having any of the other one, neurodivergent disorders, but for me specifically, because it is something that is very misunderstood. And
Hmm.
just because you don't no, you shouldn't diminish somebody, but you should really foster an environment where, like you said earlier, there's inclusivity. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? You find out
Hmm.
what they need, what works for them. For me, I am in an open office. I came from a situation, environment where I had my own office, and it worked better for me. But then I've come to an office where I'm in an open environment, I'm in a cubicle. That doesn't always work for me. So definitely like finding out what that employee needs. So I have to have headphones on all day long because I get so distracted by the littlest things. And sometimes
Hmm.
it's not
Hmm.
other people, sometimes it's just me.
Hmm.
So I think as a leader, you really, really have to like hone in on what it is that your employees need. Ask the questions, be observant, because they may not be comfortable necessarily telling you. Obviously trying to not come off as, accusatory or anything like that. And really just I think that if they were to foster that openness and make an employee feel like they're safe, then
Hmm.
hopefully the employee would feel more comfortable to advocate for themselves, and speak up.
Oh my goodness, I've loved our time together, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to join us today and share about your experience. And, we'll definitely put your links to your contact information in the show notes. You talked about some of your different gifts, your superpowers. I love what you called it. One thing that I love about you, and not just because you're my sister, but you are so creative and so just the way you pull together a show and designs and decor, like it boggles my mind. Where me, that's too much detail, is too much going on. But what you take from nothing, from some basic like balloons and streamers and things, and you create this beautiful experience. Like that is the uniqueness and the gift and the strength of you. And I just love that about you. And I love what you said earlier. It's like focusing on the superpower, focusing on the things that are working well within who you are. And it really is, it's having the
Yes,
positive self-talk. It is focusing on the scriptures of what God says about you, right? Not what you may tell yourself with negative
right.
self-talk or what somebody else says about you and judging, but really saying, no, I do have superpowers and I'm pretty dope, right? I'm pretty dope how I am. So I just love
Oh,
this. I
thank
just love it.
you.
Yes, yes,
Thank you for having me. Thank you for highlighting, neurodivergence. I think it's important to keep talking about it.
yes,
I think that people have to understand that, there is space for us. My biggest advice to anybody is just continue to march at the beat of your own drum. I really do, because if you try to put us in a box, it does not work. And that's the problem with the world right now. Like neurodivergence, it's now becoming more of a thing, it's more widespread, but there are still so much that people don't understand. And they try to put us in these boxes, these neurotypical boxes, and there are things that just don't work for us. And even as I'm trying to figure that out, they just don't work. You know what I mean? So finding your own space, you know what I mean? And being and live boldly, be bold enough to say it's okay if I don't get it right, right?
right, right.
So
No, no, I love it.
that's it.
I love it. Excellent, excellent. Well, I hope something that was shared today is helpful to you all. We will catch you again next time.
Bye. I love you. I love everyone
I
out
love you.
there.
I love you. If this episode blessed you today, please share it with a friend. Tag me on social at Audrey T. Shelby. I will see you back here again soon.